By the way, actually, let me ask you, would you like to say anything having just received this award?
Absolutely. This is a very bittersweet film. It's difficult because this is never a film that I would ever want to have to make. We've had the film out for since January, and we've done some festivals, and the accolades and the reception that the film has received has been really amazing. I would just hope that the accolades that it's received, it's really a testament to Jim, and the life that he lived, and his story it's moving people. And so personally, it's so appreciative of this award and what it stands for. At the same time, it's hard because it's difficult to accept kind of accolades for this kind of film. So I just hope that this is really about how Jim's story has really moved people, and I'm glad about that.
I don't know if my mic is... Hello, mic is live. Well, Brian, I spoke with you earlier today on a documentary panel where we were talking about the passion of documentary filmmakers, and we talked about some of your techniques at that point. So I just want to let everybody know that we're going to maybe repeat some of that material, but also give you time after our Q&A session to have ask some questions of Brian, if you wish, and also his colleagues, the producer Eva Lipman and the writer Heather McDonald are here with us, so maybe you have questions for both of them. So Brian, you showed that chilling clip of the ISIS-produced video of Jim's last moments on Earth. I'm just wondering if that was the moment for you, like, I have to make a film about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, this was about 3 months after Jim had been killed that I started really deciding to make this film on my friend. And as Marianne had kind of said at the beginning, I had approached the Foleys and talked to them about it, and I talked to some of our friends, and it was a real kind of internal debate whether I wanted to do this, and ultimately I obviously decided that I would. And the kind of catalyst for that decision was, how Jim was kind of now this historical figure. This is just my friend from elementary school that I'd known all my life, has grown up as just a couple of idiots in New Hampshire and regular kids, and all this had happened. So, I was very I was uncomfortable with how he was known throughout the world. I was angry, and I wanted to try to change the dialogue about that image, and I wanted to reclaim that image for Jim. I wanted to recontextualize it because it was, and twist it in a way so if you know who Jim was and you know what he was doing in Syria and the important work that he was doing as a journalist, that image becomes a very different image when you see it. And that was kind of, I felt like I had a responsibility to take that on, because that's how I was feeling, and that was kind of the original motivation of making this film.
His brothers, his family wonder, why was he doing this? He wonders why he was doing it when he was speaking to the crowd at Marquette. And I wonder if you had a sense then why he was doing what he was doing.
I mean, Jim really loved what he was doing. He loved he was so determined to be telling these stories in Libya and Syria, and it was, it was his calling. He was a perfect fit. He, as you could tell, he was kind of had this physical courage, and he didn't really care about things and having stuff, and he just was like, this is what he wanted to do, that's like a really unique ingredients for the recipe of someone, I think, to kind of live that kind of life. And so, I questioned it, but just because I was, I didn't maybe understand it. And so that, ultimately the film, as I started, making it, was I did want to tackle that question that was at sometimes kind of an accusatory question of like, well, why the hell was he over there doing this? And so I think ultimately that became the thesis of the film, and through the journalists that you met with Nicole and Claire and Manu and Zach, who are, who I kind of considered surrogates for Jim. They kind of give you some insight onto why they do this job and why it's important to them, and kind of different layers to that answer. And kind of through them, I was able to kind of get a little bit into the psyche of why, why Jim really wanted to do this. And that was a question I wanted to answer, because I think if you do get a little bit of that answer, then you understand, like, why he was over there.
And it does raise a lot of questions about the state of journalism, in the age of the shrinking bureaus of the official or the, let's say, traditional journalistic outlets, and the freelance journalist operating on a shoestring.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the film is very apolitical, as you saw. It's purposefully that. I didn't want to make a political film. It was, once you start diving into American policy and should you be paying ransom and totalitarianism and all these like heavy topics, you start to get away from the story of Jim. So it just wasn't the point of view of this narrative to kind of get into that. But at the same time, like, when you start throwing around like whose responsibility, is it the government's responsibility? And that can be an easy out, but especially for freelance journalists, and this is something that I learned, is that the media, the bureaus that hire these freelance journalists, I think they have a responsibility. They have a responsibility to protect these folks. They have a responsibility to make sure that they're trained, that they're getting paid, what they need in order to hire fixers or hire translators. And so, so I think responsibility amongst, to the foreign bureaus is definitely something that needs to be looked at. And the journalists themselves, listen, they have responsibilities that they need to take on as well. They need to be prepared. They need to make sure they know what they're getting themselves into. So I think, it's easy to kind of say like the government should have done this, but I think there's a lot of other kind of elements and people and groups that you kind of that you should look at as well.
Right, because a lot of people had opinions about this, certainly, and there are a lot of things, as you said, you decided not to quite cover head on, let's say. I know that his brother Michael, for example, was really critical, vehemently critical of the New York Times for portraying what he thought Jim as an enthusiastic convert to Islam, for one thing. People said that he was converted, that he's helping the Islamic State on some level. People said he had no business being there. Journalists that I know have criticized him for, not being well enough prepared. So I'm actually wondering, did the family want you to confront these kind of allegations and set them right? Is that part of what they wanted from you as a filmmaker?
They actually didn't put any sort of, you need to do this, we'd enjoy you to do that. I mean, they were really open to what I wanted to tell. The conversion to Islam, I mean, that was that statement in the New York Times was kind of polarizing. It was, you can't just really say something like that and not get into it to kind of explain, well, what does that actually mean? It's not a black and white. There's so many like layers of gray with saying somebody is converted to Islam and kind of leave it at that. So, and I know that was that bothered a lot of people that knew Jim, and so I was specifically got a little bit further into that in the film, and it was more, as you heard, it was a lot about Jim's faith. It wasn't about, I believe in this God or I believe in that God. It was about faith and just having the ability to pray and being able to do that, because such a lot of this and what we've been kind of dealing with is just trying to understand the context of the situation that these men were in, and women as well. They were in the same jail, and that's a really hard thing to wrap your mind to understand, because it's so surreal. And you just think about like the everyday things that we do in our lives. Oh, my tooth hurts and I got to go see a dentist. Like, that's a horrible situation to be in. Can you imagine being in that situation and you just can't do anything about it? Like, these are just very basic things. And so, understanding the context of that, I think, is really important. And so when you come to like religion and faith, Jim was obviously a very faithful person, and he wanted to pray, and so that it enabled him, converting and being able to pray 5 times a day enabled him to do that.
Well, one of the things you do in the film is sort of place us there in a sense, and I know from speaking with you earlier today, you spent hours and hours speaking with those who were imprisoned with him, taken hostage with him. And you did, I know you don't like the word recreate, but you did reconstitute the story for us as viewers in some kind of way. And I'm just wondering what that was like for you. I mean, you're a filmmaker, you are a friend, trying to give flesh and blood to this situation. But what was that like, piecing together this picture of them in the cell and how they endured and how Jim endured?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think, I knew what I was getting myself into, deciding to make this film, but at the same time, you don't really know what you're going to experience emotionally until you start getting into some of these things. And recreating this kind of this tableau-like space of this prison was difficult. I mean, it was, we forged ahead because it was a part of the storytelling choice that I wanted to do. But, once you get into it and you're kind of recreating some of these scenes, how you kind of imagined how it might have been, and you have people kind of playing these prisoners, it was definitely difficult. But I think the reason I wanted to do that was really just to kind of evoke the emotions of these stories that these men were telling us. And I think in a way it did help you, again, like context was super important. It gives you a little bit of an emotional attachment to what that kind of space might have felt like, even if it was just like kind of in your mind. So that was kind of the choice for doing that.
I was struck by the difference in the perceptions of Jim between his family, the sort of like, oh, he can't get it together, and, I still owe money on my credit card bill for that, or always arrived late to things, and his fellow prisoners who he sustained them in many ways. He was a steadying force for them. And I didn't know if the family was aware of that before the film. Do you think they were?
I don't think that they were. I think Jim, he was, I love the flaws of people, and I love people's faults, and I think in order to make an accurate and honest story about someone, you have to talk about those things, because our mistakes and our flaws are what make us relatable. And I think I never wanted to portray Jim as a saint, because he wasn't, and he knew he wasn't, and so that was really important. And I think in the end that really makes you connect with someone, because if it's just all good stuff, then it doesn't come across as like very honest, I don't think. So I like those qualities, and Jim obviously had plenty of them, and they were funny and frustrating to some people, but that's what makes us human. So, but as far as his resolve in during the situation, it wasn't. We didn't know it, but to me, it wasn't surprising. Jim was always kind of this man for the underdog, as you could tell. I mean, he was just really about teaching and mentoring and helping and telling stories about people who didn't have things. And so for him to kind of rise to the occasion in that kind of very those dark circumstances, I think, it doesn't surprise me, but it was something that we learned from those prisoners. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it's really, it's emotional to like kind of think about that,
Yeah, your meat-headed friend, as someone called him. Well, and it required you, I'm sure, making this film to try and get into that head. When, during making this film, did you feel, I guess, closest to him as a person and what he went through?
Well, I mean, what's really was interesting that I found out is kind of disheveled and disorganized that we thought Jim was. He kept his photo albums like immaculate. Like he had all of his photos from like Cuba, and I took a road trip with him. Me and a friend, three of us went on this post-college road trip. It's like a Death Valley to California, and he like had all of our photos like organized and just like Teach for America. Everything was like in place, and these are like printouts, of photos. And so, and the Foleys were, they let me go through all that stuff, and he had writings from his students that he taught, and his writings in his journals and all his correspondence. So, a lot of that isn't in the film, but for me to be able to just go through all of that and look at his life through photos and read his poetry or read his fiction or read his journals from the battlefield, like that was pretty incredible. And that was just something that I was able to experience. And I think that's where I felt closest to Jim during making of the film.
And looking at his footage, that must have been amazing. I mean, there's so many the bits of footage especially at the beginning, and some of those reports from Syria, from Libya. I'd really never seen anything like that. We're missing that.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people kind of come up to me after some of these screenings who are like, and they're just like, wow, they're kind of more like, thank you. I didn't really know what was. I mean, I know what's going on in Libya and Syria and the Middle East, but it's so complex, and we're kind of inundated with all sorts of different imagery from the region. But I think like seeing it in like kind of an hour and 50-minute concise storytelling, you really get a sense of, the destruction and the mayhem and the, what's going on over there, and kind of piecing his pieces together along with, footage from the other journalists that gave me their footage to include in the film. You really get this like concise visual experience of what is going on, what has gone on over there for the last, since 2011 right. is when this footage started. So, yeah, it's pretty incredible, and I think one of the reasons that kind of what I found, not going into the film, but what I came to find out, what I really love is that Jim was telling these stories in 2011, and these are stories of the Syrians that no one was really paying attention to at the time. We didn't really know. I mean, we knew that there was something, but and these are the important stories to him. And now that we're seeing the largest refugee crisis since World War II of Syrians fleeing this country from the regime. His stories that he was telling, I'm able to kind of bring those back, and I feel like that. I think he would have liked that. I think it makes me feel good that I'm able to kind of share his work with with you, and you can kind of see why these were important and how relevant they are now.
Right, that chilling moment when someone says, no one's going to help us but Al-Qaeda now, the door opening. And what we're getting a lot from there now are these videos made by ISIS, which we now know, although not then, are part of a much larger propaganda strategy, instilling fear, promoting its violence as a tool for recruitment. Now, you make clear from the jump of the film, you're choosing not to show it. But should they be played by the American media? Should we know that side of the story?
Well, I think I mean, that's a kind of an answer that I think everybody can go out and discuss for themselves. My personal view is that it's a choice that you have as an individual, whether you want to witness kind of war pornography. It is a propaganda machine. These are recruitment videos. I personally choose not to watch it. I haven't watched it, and I'm not going to take that choice away from someone who doesn't want to watch it as well by putting it in a film. It's also not something that I'm interested in. This is not about Jim's death. It's about his life. So as far as this film goes, that was my reason for doing that. I think when you talk, again, going back to responsibility, there's a lot of media out there. I mean, we are now in this world where it's no longer turning on the 6 o'clock news to watch Tom Brokaw tell you what's going on in the world. Like, you can go on the internet and you can watch anything you want at any time you want, and it's the Wild West. And I think we as consumers of media also have a responsibility to understand whatever we watch, where is that coming from? Who's behind the camera? Who's distributing this piece of media? Because we now need to decipher between what is fact and what is fiction, because there's just so much more content available to us. And I think that's a really difficult transition for civilization to make. And so, one of the questions I've never been asked, but I always thought that I would get asked, was essentially like, why in your film, like, why do you feel like you could show images of dead children, but you won't show the image of Jim being killed? And I thought about that, and what I kind of ultimately came down to the decision was, it's the murder of Jim is a piece of propaganda. It's a committed piece that was made for a specific reason. Images of war that are being witnessed by people and recorded and sent out to media outlets is journalism, and those are two very distinct and different pieces of media. And so that's kind of my reasoning behind that. But at the same time, like, I do think we have a big responsibility on understanding what it is we're looking at.
That's an excellent question. But a question I know that you have been asked somewhat about is, the U.S. government policy is really implicated in this film. That I think it was Diane who said, they did nothing. I mean, do we know that to be true? Why did you choose not to talk to anyone from the U.S. government and say and ask them about why nothing was done about Jim, or why he couldn't be saved, or some sort of reflection on this idea that we will not pay ransom for hostages in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked that question a lot. Again, it gets into the politics of the situation. It's a constantly evolving policy. It's even changed now. Diane Foley's been very instrumental in working with the Obama administration to affect change in policy. I didn't want to get into it in this film because, again, like, I had this barometer in the back of my head that was always about what would Jim want me to be talking about. And I think getting into those kinds of things, I don't know if he would. I was always like, I don't think I want to get into that stuff because they turn into rabbit holes. And I don't know if Jim would want to be, I don't think he would find that's, for me to get into that stuff as well. But at the same time, it's very important. It's absolutely important to be talking about this, these things like American policy, hostage policy. And you're right, the Foleys during this whole situation, they did not have the support from the American government that they felt that they needed in order to get Jim released. They were, if they were tried to, they were threatened with prosecution if they would raise ransom, because the American policy is that we do not negotiate with terrorists. And so that's the policy. And listen, I understand it. Like I can understand both sides of that coin. Like, why would you?
Right. If you start paying, you're encouraging. That's one of those.
Why are you going to give money to, these groups that can then turn around and use it to fund a attack on Paris? I mean, I can understand that side of the coin. On the other side, it's very personal for me and for people who knew Jim. So of course, it's like, yeah, we need to do everything we can to get these guys out. And so I am on that side. Like, we need to do everything we can to get our citizens out. And hindsight's 2020. Obama came out and said that, Diane Foley said that we didn't do enough, and she was right. And because of that, they have looked at the policy, and so what we can do now, and I think what, Diane and the foundation are really want to do is how can we move forward in a positive way? We can't look back because we can't change anything. So what can we do to help families that have hostages now? What can we do to, for the lessons that we learned? How can we help in the future so this doesn't happen again? And I think that positivity is what Jim, I think, would want. And so that's kind of where I stand on that.
And the foundation is the James Foley Legacy Foundation, right?
Yep.
They're going to be showing your film at the Freedom Awards dinner in Washington next month. So I wonder, has this become your cause? Do you feel comfortable being sort of associated with a cause in your film?
Well, I mean, my goal from the film from the very beginning was just to let people know who Jim was. Pretty simple. I mean, he was an amazing person, and I didn't want him to be known for the American journalist in the orange jumpsuit, and that's it. So, a cause. I'm not sure if I don't know if it's my cause. I think it's more of just an opportunity to share his story with people who are interested in learning more about him.
There is the psychological theory that people place themselves back in traumatic situations to see if they can get it right this time, that. And I wondered if going through this film and his material, understanding Jim better, what do you think? Why do you think he went back?
Well, I mean, after the Libya experience, I think, as we said in the film, he was feeling a lot of guilt. He was feeling guilt because of the decision that he made to go out on the front line that day with Claire and Manu and Anton Hammerl was killed. And I think he felt really guilty and a lot of responsibility for that. And I know, talking to him, because after him coming back from Libya, that I think he felt like he wanted to prove to himself that he could do it right, for sure. And this is in the film, but he actually did go back to Libya and covered the fall of Gaddafi and was there. One of the him and another correspondent from Global Post were very close to when they captured Gaddafi, and so he had real success when he went back to Libya and was able to go back and be successful as far as completing that part of the story and completing that part of his life. And you know, that was really great for him. And I think, you know, that the next natural progression was to keep doing it. And I think, you know, the part that really kind of strikes me with the journalists is Zach, when he talks about, Zach's got the Australian with the big gray beard, when he talks about kind of listening, wanting to just stay up and listening to the bombs and the gunfire, and he found like kind of comfort in that. It's like kind of sick is what he says. And it's, to me, like that was like, they're kind of like soldiers, you know, there's PTSD and that these guys go through, and that world becomes their reality. And when they leave it and they come back to, you know, their safe haven of it's really difficult adjustment for them to make. So there's all these, again, like it's not like black or white, there's all these little like layers that contribute to wanting to go back. And I think that those are just some of the pieces of that puzzle for Jim. And
well, another one of those great things that comes up for me is that Jim tells the students at Marquette that, you know, he's not a hero, he's not doing this for a noble cause. And I think Claire says he'd be mortified, you know, to be held up as a hero. But he did have that competitive streak. He did have that itch. And do you think there's any part of him that might be proud to see, you know, the murals for him in Syria, to think that he is thought of as a hero? He wanted to tell those stories.
I would, yeah. I mean, I think that he would be proud that he was able to do these stories, but to be kind of, you know, put into murals, and, you know, we all love Jim, like whether, you know, he knows it or not, but we, you know, there's just nothing he can do to stop us from being like, dude, you're a really great guy, so we're gonna like paint a mural of you. So, but you know, I think he would probably be like, no, you don't need to do that, because he was really humble and he didn't really care so much about that kind of stuff. So, but we think it's important.
I'd love to open it up to questions for Brian or for his colleague producers. We have a couple of mics rolling around. Does anybody have questions that they'd like to ask Brian? Hi there. Can we get a mic here? I can't see you that well, I'm sorry.
So thank you, Brian, for doing this work. You mentioned that we need to be educated consumers of media, and in the work that you do, I wondered if you would share some sources of media that you think would be, in your estimation, appropriate places to go as we try to wade through the complexity of the images we see every day.
Oh gosh. Where's Heather? She works for Boston.com. She'd probably have a good answer for this.
Heather, are you ducking? You out there?
Jeez. I mean, I think what I avoid, as far as like kind of where I go for news, I forget what the term is called, but let's say like the New York Times writes an article, and they say something like, you know,
Jim he was an eager convert to Islam.
Yeah, he's a convert to Islam. There's this thing that happens now on the internet where if someone writes something like that, that becomes a headline on multiple websites, and it just becomes this kind of regurgitated line that you see over and over and over and over and over again. And it's kind of these like sub-sites, I think, that take these stories and make them their own, and then maybe expand upon it or dilute it into sound bites. So, you know, I try to avoid those kinds of sites that do that. Now, you know, I love the New York Times, the Boston Globe, LA Times, the Wall Street Journal. Like, there's no way I'm going to be like saying that don't go there. But You know, I think that's kind of where I still go to get my news. I think when I say like our responsibility, it's more about like the video of Jim, like that was shot, the person that was behind the camera was a member of the Islamic State. And so, and it was a piece of media that a terrorist made and uploaded to YouTube. And they made, you know, this speech that Jim recited was, you know, a scripted speech that he was forced to say. Now, who was sitting to the right of that? We don't know. We can only imagine. So, when I say like we take on responsibility, it's just more of like thinking about kind of what you're looking at and where it's kind of coming from. I don't want to like cop out on your answer on my answer to that question, but that's kind of the best way I can answer it.
Other questions for Brian? He's going to be at the after party as well, so if you have any additional ones, you can ask.
One of the questions that I often get is what happened to John Cantley?
Yeah.
And John Cantley is still missing in Syria. And the reason I don't really kind of close out his story is because the Cantley family is chosen to remain silent about what's going on with him. But just so you know, if you're wondering, John is still missing, and we're hoping that he will be released at some point.
So nothing heard from him beyond that when the Danish prisoner left?
So John was actually, he did some propaganda videos for the Islamic State. They used him as this, like almost like Anthony Bourdain touring around Aleppo, showing how everything was great under the Islamic State. And so this kind of Westerner denouncing the West. And there were some videos that were put out and some letters that he's supposedly penned, but you know, we don't know, but he's still a hostage.
Any other questions?
Up here. Why did you not use last names on especially the journalists who were being interviewed?
So the original title, the film is Jim, and I like that title because it's what we knew him as. You know, the world got to know him as James Foley, but I knew him as Jim, and we all did. And I thought using first names for everybody was just a way to continue that concept of Jim. So Nicole and Claire and Zach, and it was strictly just kind of like a personal. I thought it gave the film a little bit more of a personal, intimate approach where last names don't really matter to us. We're all kind of friends, and this is how we talk to each other. So,
Yeah, I had to look him up. Who read that letter, that was carried in the head? Who read that in the end for you?
that was Michael Foley. He read the letter for us.
I thought it was one of the brothers.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, what an amazing film, what an amazing accomplishment, and thank you so much for sharing that life far, far beyond the orange jumpsuit with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.